That's good. We like it. All right, well then Isaiah chapter 2, that's where we're at tonight. I didn't get through any further than that, so we'll pick up there. And this is going to be an important chapter because this is going to be the first time we reach into that future prophecy. And by future prophecy, I mean our future prophecy. I guess all of this is future prophecy for the children of Israel at the time, but for us, that's going to be the one that's a little different for the far, far future. So here in Isaiah chapter 2, you got to remember that this is looking back at the book, this is not exactly the best of times for the children of Israel. They're getting ready to have a number of judgments brought upon them due to the way they've been acting. And we'll get a little bit of a breakdown in that depending on how far we get tonight. But here in chapter 2 is a day that is to come. It hasn't come yet. That will be a good day. But unfortunately there's things that are holding them back, and that's what God is kind of laying into them here. So Isaiah chapter 2 verse 1 says, "The word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem." And it is slightly different from the way that we see in verse 1 of chapter 1. So these are two separate judgments that God has given to him. And the first one, I thought this was really interesting, they were talking about in the commentary I was reading. And the first one says the vision of Isaiah, which he saw. And so that means there's something visual that was seen. But here in verse 2, it's that they were saying that it's curiously worded in that it's the word that Isaiah saw. And so if that's the case, it means that the words were so powerfully real that they were, the way it's implied here is that they were seen as much as heard. It's a pretty cool way of kind of laying that out there, and it's not shocking that God would be that way. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, the commentary called, it's very similar to the way that we see John refer to things in one chapter of Revelation, is that it's the same kind of phrasing in the way that they said it. So that's kind of cool too, that there's a callback from Revelations here to Isaiah in that regard. But as you'll see here in chapter 2, it says, "The word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." So you've heard that. That's a pretty common, especially the phrasing in verse 4, that's a pretty common kind of thing to look forward to, and that the weapons we have would be changed into tools, and that there'd be no more war, no more need for it. Clearly that hasn't happened yet. And so that's part of the reason why this is a prophecy for us. So this is going to be important in that there is a kingdom to come that was told of Isaiah here, and there will be a day where there's a number of things that happen here. It's that first that the Lord's house has to be established in the top of the mountains. And so one of the things that I had read is that they believe that the meaning of it being established meant that Christ had to die to establish the Christian faith, which would have happened on the mountain that he was crucified on, right, Golgotha. And so the thing here is that there was an establishing of this religion that would come, which is it's just the same thing but moved to a new covenant, and that it be exalted above the hills, and all, this is important, and all nations shall flow into it. Unlike the Judaism, which was very much so specific to the people of Israel, and it doesn't mean that you couldn't also practice as well, but it's very rare. Here, all nations, including the Gentiles, are welcome. And that's intentional here, in that it's not just the Jews who would be impacted here, but that it's including everyone, including the heathen, which would be us. And so, it says verse 3 that the people will go unto it, they'll seek it out, because there's something to be taught that's in the mountain of the Lord. And that they'll learn his ways and walk in his paths, and that the law would come out of Zion, and the word from the Lord from Jerusalem. And then of course in verse 4 we see that there's a judgment, so there's an idea of laws being set up as well as a righteousness, and then and also a rebuking. And so that there will be a part that people will be corrected in the ways that they should walk, and then of course the peacefulness there, the last part, so they don't need weapons anymore, but that rather they would not need to learn war ever again. Which is pretty cool. That's a great thing to know. We don't have to, there's a day to come where not only will the weapons be gone, but we don't even need to learn about combat anymore. There's no need to learn about any of those things or to prepare ourselves. We'll just be at peace. And so verse 5 is a call. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. But the problem is, that's why, here's the thing, there's a future to come, but the children of Israel are not there. That's why there's a call being made. It's a call back to, if we were in the way of the Lord, this is something we could be seeking. But unfortunately, you'll notice here verse 6, therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east, and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. And this was really interesting. So there's going to be, as we read through this tonight, I feel like there's going to be some odd parallels to some things you might see in today's world. And I'll specifically say that this is written to the children of Israel, and specifically to the children of Judah in this case. And so the thing is, it's going to be important that we keep it in that context, but there are judgments from God, and God knows what to do, and a lot of times those are reused, because if we don't learn it the first time, maybe we'll learn it the second or third or 100th time in doing it. So here what's happened is God has asked them to remain pure from the influences of other cultures, right? And that's why they were told not to marry into the Gentiles or into the heathen, because they would bring in things that are not a part of what God had set up as the law or in the part of that culture, and it was destroying the people. So what happens here is, you'll notice that they be replenished from the east. So that means that what's happened is they're not marrying amongst their own people, they're getting people for their nation from the outside. And so what's happening is that there's an influx of influence, and then you'll notice here that they've changed themselves from their normal way of being with God to be soothsayers like the Philistines. So it's a stopping of being who they're supposed to be before God, and rather they're going to start practicing after the ways of the people who have come in to influence them. And not only this, but that they please themselves in the children of strangers. So they are intentionally seeking them out to be the ones that they find. They're not even looking amongst their own people. They're looking outside for this unique, new, out perspective, whatever it may be, from these people, so that they might marry into them and have them. And it's interesting, because this was curious. It says, their land also is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end to their treasures. The land is also full of horses, neither is there any end to their chariots. Their land also is full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. And the mean man boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself, therefore forgive them not. So what happens here is Isaiah is laying out, the problem with the people of Israel here at this point is that they become focused on the wrong things. They're gathering these things, and they have them in abundance, but they're not focused on God. Instead, they're bringing it all to themselves. So they have silver and gold. They're wealthy. They have money. But the problem is that and notice that there's no end, right? They're very wealthy. They have lots of horses. They have a military might with their chariots. But they've also brought in the idols. And their focus is on what they've made and what I have. And so you'll see that there's the mean man boweth down and the great man humbleth himself. That's not a positive. Because when I read that, I thought, oh, this is a good thing, right? That someone will be humble before the Lord. But that's not the case. It's rather that they are, when it's talking about humbling, it's not in terms of to bring oneself low. It's that they're being, if I can say, I don't want to say equalized, but essentially it's that they're all together in the same grouping. There's an equality amongst them, that is, there is no greatness among them because they're all terrible, if that makes sense. If that make, you know what I'm saying, along those lines. So there are no more great men, because the great man's been humbled. There are no more, mean would be hard, not cruel, but this is not like a person who would stand up. There are none of them. So basically what they have is where it says forgive them not, is that they've lost their greatness of who they had, or their heroes, or even people to look up to, and now there's just a grouping of horrible, like it's just bland nothingness. And the problem is, you'll see this, so verse 10, enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. So the idea here is that there's a judgment coming, and that where they should be is in the Lord, right? In the fear of the Lord and the glory of his majesty, that's where they need to be putting themselves. But look where they're at. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Because the problem is, this is not sounding like Laodicea. I'm rich and increased in goods and have need of nothing, including the Lord. And so the thing is, now, once again, I'm not saying that those are the same by any chance. They're not. But what it is seeing is that the children of Israel in this time period had become so enamored with themselves, they've stopped glorifying God and started building themselves up. And it's about me, about how great I am. And you'll see that more in chapter 3. And so, it says, for the day of the Lord, because notice that the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Only God shall be exalted in the day that they're referring to in the beginning. So the problem is that right now the people, this call has gone out to them, is because they're putting themselves up and being exalting themselves rather than God. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all pleasant pictures, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day, and the idols he shall utterly abolish. So if you notice what's here, is there's a groupings of things that are put together in that they have put these things up. Right? These have been the things that have been lifted up before, above God in this time period. So you're looking at the greatest of things you read in the Old Testament, right? The cedars of Lebanon are legendary. The oaks of Bashan are legendary. You have high mountains and the hills. These are the things that have been lifted up. These ships in Tarshish, the high tower, every fenced wall, and then verse 16, those pleasant pictures, or my Bible gives like the notion that it's like pictures of desire, right? The things that people want, the great thing, that were paintings or great artworks. These are all the things that have been lifted up. Meanwhile, they've forgotten God. And so that God says in there in verse 17, that the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, but the Lord shall be exalted. And those idols we talked about earlier, they'll be destroyed. And the people, right, they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Is that they'll have to hide themselves from the glory of God himself when it shakes the earth into the earth itself. In that day, and this is good, right? This is a praising thing, I think. In that day a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rock and into the tops of the ragged rocks for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils, for wherein is he to be accounted of. So what's interesting is that they'll take those same idols that they had and they've lifted up and praised and worshipped and put all above God, and they'll cast them to the lowest of creatures. The bats and the moles, the ones that live underground. Which is good, right? But the problem is that there's not a. It's almost, I don't want to say it's too late because that's not what it says here, but it's almost too late, right? They're running in fear because there's wrath now upon the earth. And his fear and his glory that shakes the earth terribly, and terrible in a fearful manner, right? And so it's interesting that we see this contrast, right? The beginning of the chapter is about this time that is to come, where there's good and prosper, and that God shall be the one who takes care of judging. But the problem is that people have gotten in the way. They built all these things up to be in front of God, and now there's a judgment that has to come, right? They have to be brought low because of their arrogance. And it's interesting here in chapter 3, because we're going to see a couple breakdowns of some of the things that happen. Because this is kind of going into detail of it. It says, "For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water." And this was interesting because you've got to remember they were just described as very wealthy and very powerful. But the problem is that God says, I'm going to remove my hand from you. Like, I've allowed these things to be here. You've had water and you've had food because of me. I'm going to take it away. And when I do, I'm not just going to take away your resources. Because this is really curious to me. And I told you, I think there's some terrifying consistencies here with some things I might see in today's world. Not just in the United States, but across the planet as a whole. Verse 2, "The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50, and the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them." So this is a continuation of verse 3 saying that I will take away your bread, I will take away your water. I'm going to take away your mighty men and your men of war. So that's going to go with verse 3 as well in terms of the captain of 50. Those three talks about, you had military might, remember all those chariots? Yeah, I'm going to take those away. Now you won't have these heroes to lead you into battle. You won't have men who understand how to fight. I'll take them away. Now you just have, well, you'll get children, but we'll get that in a second. And so he's like, who will lead you into battle with your great military? I'm going to take away your judge and your prophet and the prudent and the ancient. I'm going to take away your honorable man and your counselor. He says, I'm going to take away all the things that you would find for advice, all the things you would look to for justice. I'm going to take away all the things that you would hold to in terms of the things of the old ways. They're all going to be gone. You're not going to have justice anymore because the judge is gone. You're not going to have the words of God brought to you in a way that you're useful. So I'm going to take away the prophet. I'm going to take away the ones who are wise amongst you with the prudent. I'm going to take away the ones who've lived a long period of time in the ancient. And I'm going to take away anyone who is honorable. And your counselors, the ones you'd ask for advice, they're gone. I'll take those away too. And then he also says, you put all those art pieces above me. You made yourself high. So I'm going to take away all of your creativeness. I'm taking away your cunning artificers. Those are the people who would make things. And I'm taking away anyone who has the ability to use words. They're all gone. And what I'll give you, I'm going to take some things away, but I'll give you something back. I'll give you children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And it's really curious because I was reading about this and I wondered, does that mean actual physical children, or does it mean children in name only? And ironically enough, it means both. The wording here means that you'll actually literally have children who cannot do anything for themselves to be your ruler. What do you do when you have a child, but you have no one to teach them? You have no counselors, you have no wise men. How does a child rule if it has no one to help? There's that. Or, worse, you'll have men, but they'll be children at heart. They'll have emotional fits, they'll have foolishness, they'll be ignorant, and those will be your leaders.
They carried them on to the day.
Doesn't it though? Well, so here's the thing. Like I said, this is clearly about Israel, right? It's talking about Judah and Jerusalem specifically. But man, does that sound like, genuinely, as I was reading through this, because I've lamented this, right? I really wish I had some good role models I could point to from a societal standpoint for my children. I really wish that I wish I didn't have to feel like I'm picking the worst of two things whenever I go to vote, and that's not just in the national elections. Boy, I really wish I could, one of the things, you all don't know this because I'm the only one who's probably in depth here, but one of the things that's been lamented heavily here lately is that we have not had creativeness in the gaming industry, in the movie industry, even in books in decades. When you go back and read things from the, from the 70s and the 80s, or even further back than that, it's a whole different world. And then now you come in here and it's like, we're just going to remake everything. This is the 17th time we've remade Spider-Man. It's like, oh great, one more time we get to see the same story. I'm glad I can see Uncle Ben die again. And so the thing is like we're broke creatively. We have no leaders. We have no one who we don't even have people we turn to for good advice because they're corrupt too. And it's like, boy howdy, well look at these people we have to lead you. And it's like, oh cool, they throw temper tantrums, they lie, they steal, they cheat, and see no reason to be wrong with it. And it's like, I'm not shocked that it's children. This isn't written to us. But God knows how to bring judgment upon people who are arrogant and think they have everything and refuse to put God first and put other things in front of Him. I'm not shocked. Like, are we that different? Would God use a different form of judgment upon us? Possibly, but there's also some overlap possibly too. Notice this. This is so curious to me. Verse 5. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor, and the child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. This is the craziest thing to me, right? I guess this is written well before anything would happen. When I read this is exactly what I feel like is the fear of people on social media. It's the cancel culture. It's the destruction. It's like, I'll oppress you. And if you oppress me, I'll oppress you before you can oppress me. And now everyone's oppressed by everyone, except for there's the oppressed, those who are the oppressed are the ones oppressing, but then also the ones who are oppressing are creating ways to oppress the oppressors. And so, like, what ends up happening then is you have, and this is curious too, because this is actually one of the things that really bothers me about our society, is there doesn't seem to be anything about, there's no like respect of anyone, whether that's someone who's earned it or not, right? So the children, they say, well, you're old, why should I listen to you, you know? And then the base against the honorable. You even have people who should be given honor, but there are people below them who are like, well, I would have done it better. While they sit at home with their Dorito fingers, typing away on their keyboard, right? Look at that. It's crazy to me that this is God's judgment against Judah and Jerusalem. And once again, that's not written to us. Boy, doesn't it sound similar. Verse 6, when a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father, saying, thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and let this ruin be under thy hand. And this is wild. In that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be an healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing. Make me not a ruler of the people. So what happens here is, this is the craziest thing. They can't get anybody to be a ruler. They need somebody. So they go and grab random people and go, hey, you're going to be the ruler. And then they go, no, I can't. And the reason, this was curious, because the thing is there's an implication one way or the other. If you look at verse 6, the reason they pick this person is they say, well, you have clothing, so you be the ruler. You have things, so you be the ruler. You have more things than I do, so you be the one who's in charge. But also notice it says there, right, let this ruin be under your hand. You fix the mess. I'm not going to fix it. You fix it. Because you have more than me. It's your job. This is a story of like everything I read about when it comes to my generation. Well, if I was Elon Musk, I'd spend my money on this, that, and the other. I'd fix everything. Well, if I was Jeff Bezos, I'd pay taxes and do all these things. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't do it anymore. But here's the thing. You have more than me, so it's your job to fix it, not mine. Then what is the person? This is so crazy to me. So then what is the person with this who's been told this says, no, I don't want to be a healer. They asked me to be a ruler. Because I don't want to be a healer. I'm not a healer, right? And I don't have anything. Look at my house. I don't have anything. So there's either one of two things. Either they're telling the truth, and even those they think have money and have these things have nothing, or they're lying. And saying, no, pick someone else. It can't be me. Isn't that wild? It says, make me not a ruler of the people. And so it's talking about, I was reading in the commentaries, like, they asked him to be a ruler, and a good ruler should be a healer, especially in a situation like this. And God's like, no, I don't want to fix anything. That ain't me, bro. Don't feed me. Go feed somebody else. I'm just going to have my money. Except for there's none in here. There's none in my house. Don't look over here. It's somewhere else. Which is really interesting. So what happens? Well, verse 8. For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah has fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord to provoke the eyes of his glory. And that's a really interesting phrasing, I think. So what happens is that Jerusalem and Judah they're destroyed. They're in desolation. And because notice their tongue, so their words, and their doings, so their actions, are against the Lord, and they are, because this is curious, they provoke the eyes of his glory. And so the eyes of his glory being provoked is not a good thing. It's almost, because of what I understand this to be, as I've been trying to read it. Because once again, some of this is a little complex. My understanding of this part is that we're essentially provoking God to show just the difference between him and us. Right, in this case. And so Judah has caused the eyes of God, the glory of God, to be insulted because of their actions. And so it's like, now I have to show you them. Right, that's when we go back, because what was it that shook the earth? It wasn't God's power or his might. It's his glory, of his majesty, that shakes the earth terribly. And so that's what's happening here. Notice in verse 9, it says, the show of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. So not only are their actions offensive to God to so much that they've had to provoke him to look upon them with his glory, but that they flaunt their evilness in front of God. They're not ashamed of it. They rub it in his face. And boy, ain't it though? I told you. I read through this chapter. I was like, man, that's some scary stuff, ain't it? To think that, like, how many things do we flaunt openly as a nation? Once again, this isn't written to us. Boy, if it's not a close comparison to the description of them and us. And notice that to what it says in verse 9, the end of that I think is really key. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Like, you've brought this upon yourself. Verse 10, say ye to the righteous that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. This is curious to me, because what this says is there is a bad judgment coming. And it's going to get worse as we go. Things are going to get bad. But God says, tell the righteous, I'm still going to take care of them. Now, they're not going to be completely untouched in all of this. It's just not going to happen. But that they will be taken care of. And there's an assurance there that even while the wicked are destroyed, that there will be a place of mercy for the righteous. But only for the righteous. Because in verse 11 it says, woe unto the wicked. It shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given him. You've earned it. Here's that paycheck. You've worked hard for this evil reward. There you go. Take your extra reward. Now this was curious to me too. Verse 12, because it's not. When I first read it, I thought, oh, okay, wait, hold on. I need to know whether this means what I think it means. It's a little more poetic than it is what you'd think. So it says in verse 12, as for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. Now, as best I can tell in reading this, does not mean that they are referring directly to children and women, but that there are the people in leadership are acting in ways that would have been congruent with what a child and or women during this time period would have been viewed as. So when you see this, although I will say, let me throw a little bit of modern day into it for understanding for us. Have you not seen children who are oppressors over their parents? Right, like you can go the Walmart and see it. And it's interesting because that's a really interesting phrasing. But the idea behind this is that they are being oppressed by people who have no emotional control, who have no regulation, that have very little intelligence and very little wisdom, and yet they rule as a tyrant. There's a book I've read about talking about about men and the shadow of men, and one of the things they talk about is the tyrant. Is it the tyrant boy, the tyrant child? Essentially, it's the idea of a child who rules from a high chair with cruelty, right? Like, and you think about a child in a high chair, right? You're trying to feed them, they smack the food away even when they're hungry. They don't want the carrots that they asked for. They wanted hot dogs, they begged for hot dogs, but now they don't want hot dogs, so they just flip them. They like slap you or bite you, and it's like they're horrible critters in those moments. And it's interesting because that's what this is implying. That's the people who are ruling over the children of Israel. And God's like, you chose it. I'll let you have it. They bite the hand that feeds them. And the part for women here is, once again, going back to the idea of this time period. Right? This is not talking about women as a whole, not as like a generalization, but it's specifically talking about those who are like the worst of the worst in terms of how they would have ruled. And so the part that's here is that there's no, once again, generalization of this time period. There's no logic in any of the ruling. There's no thought process put in terms of past, this is how I feel, this is how I think, this is what it is. Why? Because women weren't learned. They didn't have education. They didn't get to have any of the education. So there was no ability to utilize, hey, I understand the law. It's, I feel this is the way it should be done. I don't care what the law says. And so it's really interesting here that that's the implication here. It's not that women are the worst things in the world. You've got to understand the time period and what's happening. So children are their oppressors. Women rule over them. And the people who are over them, it says, oh my people, which is a cry, right, to them, they which lead thee are intentionally causing you to err. And they're destroying the paths of the old ways with intention. So the people who are in charge are not just intentional, they're not just ruling poorly as children or fools, but instead they're intentionally causing them to go in a path that is wrong while knowing it's wrong, and then also burning every bridge on the way there.
Sounds like colleges.
I'll say this to me sounds like everything you could put in any context. I was even thinking about one of the stories I was reading about Europe. This is exactly what I would argue. I don't know if you haven't looked into what's going on in like Britain right now, there's basically a small civil war happening there. It's insane. And the thing is like, you have people who are, or like even like when I hear, once again, not to get over the point, but when I hear about what's happening in our nation, where it's like, well, we need to go try out these, we'll talk about it. You know, we have a presidential candidate who has been advocating for, communist rule changes to pricing and to these are things that have been done before. We know for a fact they do not work. We've done them in our nation. We did it during World War II.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, 100%.
Look at Canada and look at England.
And they'll always point to like Denmark, or it's like, well, Denmark has 100 people there. like don't get me wrong, I understand, but Denmark is the size of East Tennessee, and not all of East Tennessee. Like everything east of Knoxville. Congratulations, it has 4 people there. Like, yeah, I'm so shocked that they're all the same person. They're all Danish. They're all white guys who are pasty. Like that's all they have. There is no diversity in Denmark. I always love when people talk about universal health care in that regard. It's like, no. So here's the thing. What you're seeing here is that you have a movement towards things we know have not worked in the past. Or it's like even, I can't remember what, it wasn't one of the primary presidential candidates. It might have been the one from the Libertarians. Anyway, that they were literally like, well, these things worked really well in Venezuela. Huh? You mean that Venezuela? The one that's like currently on fire over here? Like there's like people are just getting blown away in the streets? Yeah, no, can we, whatever they're doing, not do that. Like that should be the rule book we don't do. And it's like, yeah, but we're going to do this because it'll work for us. But we know it won't. And then also, the whole entire thing that we see with, once again, not to get too much into politics, but what we see in our country And today, or even like what you see somewhat in the world stage, is we're destroying what was in the past. There are traditions and reasonings for a lot of things that have happened in the past. And it's like, there's the old saying, I want to say it's Ty Powell who said this to me. It's like, don't ever knock down a fence unless you know why it was there in the first place. Right, like, just because you took over the land, you need to know why the fence was there in the first place before you kick it down. Because you might let something in or let something out you shouldn't have done. And I think that's a really wise saying, but the problem is like, we're looking at things and going, well, this is old. And no one cares. And notice here in verse 13, like, see, God says, the Lord standeth up to plead, and he standeth to judge the people. He's there. He wants to help. The Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people and the princes thereof, for you have eaten up the vineyard, and the spoil of the poor is in your houses. What mean ye that you beat my people to pieces, and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord God of hosts? And so the thing is that they're taking advantage of the most vulnerable of their people, while also pretending like they're not. And God is saying, I will stand up for those when you won't. And I think that's really sad to look at as a whole, because man, it's dark. Right? And this is the children of Israel. Right? These are God's people. These are the same people he brought out of Egypt. These are the same ones that he brought across opened the Red Sea for, gave them manna from heaven. And this is the country, the people that say no. Like, we'll rule ourselves now. Thank you. We don't need your help anymore. Well, God's blessings have just been spat upon. I don't want to, let me see. How much is left in this chapter? I can get through the rest. All right, because I read through this is where I like to go. The last part here is specific. So God is starting to make specific accusations here. And that's going to continue a little bit as we go forward. But the real accusations up to this point have been the people in leadership. And I would argue that's not just the ones in political leadership, but the ones in the home and then within religion too, because that's what you're seeing in verse 3. Now we're going to move towards a very different group of people. And it says, moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks, and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tingling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab of the crown of their head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. So, what this means is that this is going to be a judgment upon specifically some of the women here in Zion. Because what's happening, and this is so curious to me, as I was reading through this and I was like, it's odd that it be pointed out, but it makes sense. So when you look at what God has asked of people in the Old Testament, and then we come to here, is very different. So first of all, they're haughty. That's been said of the men too, right? Everyone thinks they're better than everyone. But it says here that they walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes. And the idea behind that is that there's a deception between their eyes. There's a cravenness there. It's an intentional, I don't say evilness, but it's an intentional part of deception to who they are, while also being haughty and looking down upon everyone. And it talks about mincing. Well, it says walking and mincing. Mincing is the idea of tripping nicely, is what the word means. But it's the idea of that they walk on their toes, lest their foot touch the ground. And so the problem is what is happening here, if I can give you an example, is that these are women who are prancing about, intentionally seeking to deceive and intentionally destroying people around them because of their haughtiness. And so God says, I'll smite their head with a scab at the crown of their head, and that I will discover their secret parts, which means I'll reveal their nakedness, not in a particularly physical way, but in terms of I will remove the covering they have so that everyone sees them for what they are. Which is curious, because notice the next thing that gets pointed out here in just a second. It says, in that day, the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet. Which apparently that was the other thing too. They were tying like bells around their feet so that everyone knew they were coming and going. Everyone knew that they were here, and they would prance about with their, like, look upon me, haughtiness. And so he says, I will take away the bravery, like that arrogance of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, their calls, which is like their networking or groupings, and they're round tires like the moon, which essentially, so what this is going to talk about is that they have a series of things they're wearing, because we'll see here in the next part, right? The chains and the bracelets and the mufflers, and it's not a muffler like in a car. The bonnets and the ornaments of the legs and the headbands and the tablets and the earrings, the rings and nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel, and the mantles and the wimples and the crisping pins, the glasses and the fine linen and the hoods and the veils. So what is happening here? Because I had to dive deep on this because I was curious. Like, what in the world? What is going on is, and there's a joke that has been made about this in a couple of different TV shows. Essentially, once again, going back to their wealth. Rather than taking the money that they have and utilizing it towards good, they've bought ungodly amounts of things and accessories and whatnot. To the point that that idea of, where it talks about changeable suits of apparel, has the implication that they were changing clothes multiple points in the day so that nothing ever got too dirty and that they always had something new and fresh that they might be seen in. And so the thing is they bought all of these things not because they needed them or not because they were, like, it's not, there's not, the having of a bracelet or a bonnet or whatever was not the problem. It's that they had them in such abundance that it was a spit in the face to anyone who didn't have it. And then it was all about, look at me. Like, look at how great I am. I'm changing clothes 7 times in the day so that every time you see me I look different and go, oh, she must be special. And so, well, this is specific to the women because clearly the men are too busy being idiots. So here what they've done is these women are bringing this attention to themselves and saying, don't worry about, well, they're not intentionally, but don't worry about God. Look at me. Look how great I am. And of course they walk around with their necks up and their bells on their feet and they're jingling. That starts to make sense, right? Look upon me. And it's so wonderful and how great I am. So it says here in verse 24, and it shall come to pass that instead of a sweet smell, there shall be stink. Instead of a girdle, a rent. Instead of well-set hair, baldness. And instead of a stomacher, a girding of sackcloth, and burning instead of beauty. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war, and her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit upon the ground. So the idea here is God says, I'm going to take away the things you want. And so what it is here is that instead of a sweet smell of incense, you get stench. Instead of your girdle that makes you look in the way you want in terms of the particular parts, I'm going to tear it in half. It'll be rent. Instead of, and because I thought this was, instead of your hair that you've spent so much time looking upon, which once again, think about where we're at in this time period, it's that same, it carries similar phrasing to that plaited hair that we see in the New Testament with Paul. Says you'll get baldness. I'll remove all your hair. And instead of the stomacher, because I didn't know what that word meant, it's a like a scarf, a gilded scarf. It was often like not an embroidery, but almost like a gold gilding. It was very fancy and very nice. So instead of that scarf you'll get, instead you'll be putting sackcloth around yourself. And instead of your beauty, you'll burn. And the people, those men that you wanted to draw the attention of to see that they would bring to you, well, I'm going to kill them. They'll fall by the sword and they'll die in war. So that when you're at home, your gates, while you're there, you'll lament and mourn and be desolate and sit on the ground by yourself. Bring glory to yourself. That's a terrifying judgment, right? Against
Bad.
yeah, it's really bad. And so the thing to me is it's really interesting because I think, once again, so how do I use Isaiah? How do I use Isaiah chapter 3 in my own life? But the curious part is like, how does that apply? Well, part of it is that how easy are we to be the ones who get, look, the thing we have to be careful of is that we bring the things about ourselves and that we make the things about us rather than God. We take and have and want and more, and we consume and consume and consume, which is another thing that's happening in today's world. So much so that we forget that God is the one we need to be focused on and not ourselves. God says, okay, fine. You want it? You can have it. Then I'm going to take all of it away. Every bit of it. So at the point when there will come a day where all you have is yourself, by yourself, sitting in the gates, crying, alone. Because that's where they're at. We're not done yet either, by the way. There's more chapters to go. That's chapter 3. But that's where I'll end for now. What I think is curious is that Isaiah, because also, understand, we are reading this in retrospect. Isaiah is going to the people and telling them, hey, this, by the way, this is going to happen. It happens soon. So this does happen to the children of Israel. Like, this is coming for them. And, you know, I can look back and say, well, there's some interesting parallels in our world and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's a reality for them. Which is terrible for them in the moment, right? Because there's judgment. But the beautiful part is that means chapter 2 is true too. That means there is a day coming, right? Just as sure as the rest of it came, there is a day coming. But people will say, come, let's go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he'll teach us of his ways. And we'll walk in his paths. And then we'll take and beat the swords and the plowshares and the spears and the pruning hooks, and, well, we won't have to learn war no more. We'll be at peace. So I'm looking forward to that day. I don't know if I'll be looking for the rest of this. I'm looking forward to that day. I think that's pretty good. So, Isaiah chapter 2 and 3. Next week we'll pick up 4 and maybe 5, because 4 is pretty short. And then we'll see how it goes from there. Yeah?
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well then, if you will, I'll ask you to pray with me once more, and then we'll be dismissed from there. Lord, we thank you for bringing us back here again safely tonight. We thank you for giving us a good time in your word. And Lord, I appreciate, even though I didn't get to sit down as much as I would like to on all of it, I appreciate you letting me sit down to learn a little bit and study some of these parts I was really confused about. And God, I am thankful for the fact that there's a good day coming. But Lord, I'll also thank you for the judgment. Because if we get out of line, God, I'd rather be corrected than to get too far away from you. And so Lord, thank you. Thank you for your judgment. And thank you for your holiness. And we lift you up for it. And God, I just ask that you will show us in our own lives, Lord, the things that we might need to be paying attention to so we don't find ourselves so far away from you that it has to come in such an extreme way. And God, we'll lift you up and praise your name and thank you for all the blessings you give us, Lord, that are so undeserved. Lord, and just ask for your help for giving us a path each day that we might follow for you. Thank you. In your precious name we pray. Amen. Well, thanks for being here. Appreciate you. We'll see you Sunday, Lord willing.